Join you in the front row. This could actually quite well, yeah. Yeah, you can do that.
The people from the
Wow.
that was nice. He didn't have it, so I had thought about that. This I would run a case. About a case. Yeah. Now generally these the picture. How's it going?
Okay. Hey, hi everyone. We'll start in about 1 minute. Ready? Okay, fantastic. Good morning, everyone. If you're not yet in the room, please come in the room, but we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot of colleagues online. So just again, good morning and welcome to this co-hosted event with Uniting Efforts and the Global Institute for Disease Elimination, also called GLIDE. My name is Ngozi Arandu and I am the technical director at GLIDE. And we welcome you to our event on shifting paradigms, where today we're going to explore if NTD innovation can fit within existing pooled procurement mechanisms. Before we get started, I want to introduce the GLIDE CEO, Mr. Simon Bland, to give his welcome. He'll be giving a video welcome.
Good morning. Welcome and thank you for being part of this roundtable discussion on innovative finance for neglected tropical diseases. I'm really sorry I can't be there with you this morning. I'm with Site Savers at their technical advisory group, but I know you're in great hands with Isaac Chikwawa from GHIT and with Ngozi and Isatu and Lisa from Glide. As we look at neglected diseases and what stands in the way of making great progress in controlling and eliminating these diseases, we know that one big barrier is access to finance. And so we've convened a series of roundtables to think about whether or not we can apply innovative financing tools from elsewhere in health and beyond and apply those to the particular challenges of NTDs. And so I see these roundtables as crucially important for helping us all accelerate progress to that endpoint of elimination. As we started this work with a core group, we identified 4 possible models that we think could be worth exploring in more detail. We will look at debt swaps, we will look at milestone-based financing, we will look at impact bonds, and today the subject of the roundtable is on pooled procurement. I hope you have a very fruitful conversation today, thinking about the practicalities and ways in which we might apply lessons from pooled procurement elsewhere to the particular challenges of NTDs. And I really look forward to seeing the results of your conversations today. Best of luck, thank you again, and have a great day.
Many thanks to Simon for his welcome. And I also want to introduce Mr. Tetsuya Itani, who's the director of the Office of Global Health Corporation in the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare for the government of Japan. He's also a GHIT board member, and GHIT and the government of Japan are 2 of the 3 entities of uniting efforts. So please go ahead, Mr. Itani, who's joining remotely.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. On behalf of the 3 partners of uniting efforts for innovation, access, and delivery, UNDP, ADP, GHIT Fund, and the government of Japan, I would like to welcome you to this event to discuss how we can improve procurement of NTD health technologies. I'm Itani Tetsuya, Director for Global Health Corporation, Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare of Japan, and a board member of GHIT Fund. This uniting efforts, established in 2019, was created with the aim of bringing together all the stakeholders involved across the value chain, from innovation to access and delivery implementation, to discuss and find solutions, how we can deal with the barriers that impede progress towards ensuring access, and how we can bridge the gap between innovation, R&D, and access, not only for NTDs, but other diseases like TB and malaria. I believe we have a clear idea of what some of those barriers are, and now is the time for concrete, bold actions towards addressing them. I recognize that just last month, the uniting efforts were all gathered in Nagasaki, Japan, on the eve of the G7 Health Ministers meeting in Nagasaki, and discussed how to accelerate R&D and access for NTDs. And this issue of sustainable procurement was highlighted as an area that needed to be addressed. So this event could not have come at a more opportune moment to really do a deep dive into how we can deal with that. It also comes hot on the heels of the pledge of the government of Japan of $200 million to the GHIT Fund announced by Prime Minister Kishida on the occasion of the G7 Hiroshima Summit. Hopefully, that will see the acceleration of the R&D of critical health technologies, but without sustainable procurement, those technologies will not have any impact on the communities that need them. I wish all productive deliberations today and look forward to seeing some concrete steps toward ensuring a seamless end-to-end R&D to access to and delivery ecosystem to bring maximum impact to society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Itani. So many of you have actually come from 2 days in an NTD partner meeting that was hosted by WHO. And I really commend you for coming back, not leaving us, because this is a very important conversation, as Simon and Mr. Itani has said. Really, Dr. Sose, who was the director of NTDs, he told us that the community needs to move from advocacy to action. And we think that this pooled procurement event, this meeting, really discussing what is practical, how can we actually get somewhere from talking about the need to increase finance, to look at different finance instruments, to actually having potentially a pilot with countries and diseases and products where we can go forward. And, often when we talk about innovative finance, the first thing that a lot of our partners say in the core group that Simon was talking about is that there's really nothing innovative to what we're talking about. But we want to apply these instruments that have been used across disease areas to NTDs, to neglected tropical diseases. So that's why we're calling it innovative. I want to just go over the agenda with you all so you know what to expect today, and then a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll start with our keynote. So there are 3 main components of today. The first one is the Uniting Efforts Research Overview. Specifically, they'll be detailing the state of procurement for NTDs and recommendations for integrating within existing pooled procurement mechanisms. That will be for about 20 minutes. And then for 50 minutes, we will have a panel and discussion. So there are about 8 different speakers, some in the room, I think half in the room and half online. So experts that have had experience with different PPMs, but also think about the different components of a pooled procurement mechanism, or what needs to be in place so that this can be actualized. And then and that's about 1 hour and 20 minutes altogether with the discussion. And then finally, we'll have, the first part that I just described, so the overview and the presentation and the panel and the discussion, that's all online. So thank you again for everyone joining online, and that will be recorded and available afterwards. And then the last part, after a 10-minute break, we'll have roundtable discussions and then talk about practical next steps and/or pilot opportunities. And that will be 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we really hope that everyone in the room has made plans to stay for most of the day. We have, so housekeeping, we have coffee and some snacks in the back. We'll have, I think, multiple coffee breaks throughout, but you're welcome to just get up. The bathrooms, if you go take a right and go through the door and then make another right, the last door before you go outside, you'll see the door for the bathrooms. The round tables will be both indoor and outdoor, so we won't have you cooped up too much. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Isaac Chikwana. He is the Senior Director for Access and Delivery at the Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, or GHIT. And he leads the work supporting GHIT Fund grantees to develop their access plans with the aim of ensuring equitable and affordable access to the technologies that GHIT Fund, with a focus on low-income countries and low and middle-income countries that they focus on. Prior to joining GHIT, Isaac worked with MSF for nearly a decade in various countries and positions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ngozi, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those online. As already mentioned, Isaac Chikwana, Director of Access and Delivery at the GHIT Fund. So let me just start with a bit of a story of how this discussion started. As Ngozi said, one of my roles at the GHIT Fund is to work with GHIT grantees in developing their access plans. And one of the questions that kept coming up was, we have the technology, GHIT has the funding, we can do the R&D. What happens when the products are available? And the question was, who's going to procure? That was one of the questions. And that's how really the seeds of this discussion started. So we started, consulting with other people, what needs to be done. And eventually we came to the idea that we needed to do a kind of landscape analysis to provide a background on what is really happening on the ground And then based on that, we can then bring multiple stakeholders together and we can try to map the way forward. So that's how this whole discussion started. So today I'm representing the Uniting Efforts for Innovation, Access and Delivery Partnership, which is the partnership between the government of Japan, UNDP, ADP, and the GHIT Fund. And I believe I'll be presenting a summary of the landscape analysis we've been doing for the greater part of the last 2 years. There are breaks due to COVID in there as well. And also some of the challenges getting really the information about what's happening on the ground. There is an issue brief available that has a little bit more detail on the findings of that landscape analysis. And I believe most of you have access to it. If not, my colleague Lisa is going to put a link in the chat box for those online to get access to the issue brief. But some of you have already been involved in the development of this issue brief, so this should not be new to you. So without further ado, I'll start the presentation and then we can go into the panel discussions and open discussions. So just a brief, could we have the slides, please? Sorry. Second one, next one. I believe I should be able to do it myself. Oh, thank you. So just a brief on the Uniting Efforts Partnership has already been mentioned by Itani-san. The partnership was created in 2019 between the government of Japan, UNDP, ADP, and the GHIT Fund. And we have a two-pronged approach. So one is we provide a forum to bring multiple stakeholders to discuss the issues and barriers to access to health technologies across neglected diseases. And for the purpose of Uniting Efforts, we cover NTDs, TB, and malaria. But the idea, most of these barriers are cross-cutting. You can find them for any other disease. So the idea is to really bring stakeholders to discuss what are the issues and then what are the possible solutions. So that's one way the Uniting Efforts works. The other is then depending on what the stakeholders put as the priorities, we then go into deep dives to try to generate evidence for action. So this evidence can be used for advocacy or to really stimulate further discussion into, concrete, actionable next steps, like the procurement work we did. So the outputs we have had so far since 2019, we have managed to hold 2 global dialogues where we really bring people from all over the world together and multiple stakeholders involved across the access value chain, from innovation to implementation on the ground, and patient groups, civil society. And these 2 were in Bangkok in 2019 and 2020. And from there, we came up with a list of priorities that the Uniting Efforts was tasked to, to sort of lead in doing deep dives. And out of that, we've managed to have 3 technical meetings, 2 in New York in 2019. And then unfortunately, COVID hit and the whole world came to a stop. So we went virtual and we had 1 more in 2021. But we were really disrupted by COVID, so there wasn't that much action. But we managed to produce knowledge products or one on innovative financing, which sort of also provided the background for the innovative financing work that the GLIDE is doing. And another one for investment cases for NTDs, because one of the things that came up was, yes, you can have innovative financing, but you need to equip the ministries of health to have the investment cases to access those innovative financing tools. So that's why we're trying to link that. And this is, there are 2 in the pipeline, one on procurement, which is today. And we're also working on access considerations during the R&D process. And currently we are working on developing a strategic plan for Uniting Efforts for the next 5 years. So the problem statement, I've already given you a bit of a background of why we started this. So there was a general understanding that the current procurement mechanisms for NTDs are not enough to deliver for all the NTDs, to deliver all the health technologies that are required. So there were limitations to what was happening on the ground, and we needed to find alternative ways to really cover all the NTDs so we could meet the SDG and NTD 2030 roadmap targets and beyond. So some of the reasons proposed you see from the analysis, there's market fragmentation, there's lack of clearly defined procurement mechanisms, the lack of funding. So there are quite multiple things that we'll try to explain in the presentation. Just a note that the work we did is not like a full-blown scientific study. It was really just a landscape to get a quick analysis of what was happening. And the idea was then, building on this, we can really, try to even dig deeper into the different aspects of what came out of that landscape analysis. So the objectives was to conduct a situation analysis of what's happening for NTDs in terms of procurement. And then also to look at how other diseases, like HIV, TB, malaria, hepatitis C, and even COVID, how the health technologies for those diseases were being procured. And the idea was to see what lessons could be learned from that and what could be applied to NTDs. And then again, to identify concrete steps forward to improve NTD procurement. So the methodology it started with a literature review of existing mechanisms for NTDs, which was quite complicated because most of the procurement mechanisms are not academic studies. So you don't find them in literature. So we had to reach out to people involved in procurement, the procurement mechanisms that are currently, that we all know, from the Global Fund, the GDF, MSP, UNICEF, really to try to find what was happening. And we even had talk to countries to see what they were doing, because you don't really find this in literature. Or you could go on websites, but each organization is talking about what they do, but doesn't necessarily mean that's what's happening on the ground. So this bit of information was very difficult to find. But based on that, we had something to go on, and this is what we're going to present today. And then we also did the questionnaires with other stakeholders. Some of them are actually in this room on their experiences. And we had an initial quick analysis, and then we convened a technical meeting, virtual technical meeting in 2021, where we brought some technical experts to really review what we had found at that point, and then to identify areas that needed a bit more digging to make this worthwhile document. So based on that, we went back, we continued the discussions with the experts until we got to a point where we're like, okay, I think we have a document that's good enough to stimulate, to provide a background for the discussions going forward. And that is the contents you find in the issue brief. So the results, probably this is not rocket science. Everybody knows, is expecting what we found when it comes to NTDs. Almost everyone you would ask, how are NTD tools procured? They'll tell you it's donation. That's what everybody knows is the procurement tool. So donation programs form the core of procurement, of how NTD products are procured by countries. And this is really based on long-term standing agreements between pharmaceutical companies and the WHO and other funders who support this work, like USAID, like BMGF, like DHL, who support this this activity. And this is also complemented by direct purchasing, by national programs, by ministries of health, by implementing partners. And again, it was almost impossible to really find information, because every country is procuring. It was very difficult to tell who's procuring what, for what purposes, from who, the quality. So there's really no aggregated data on direct purchasing, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but then it's very difficult to have a global picture of where the issues are. I mean, countries are independent. They are allowed to procure what they want for what they want. But if you want to have a global picture to really understand where the gaps are, I think there needs to be a kind of aggregation of this information somewhere. We don't have a solution for that, but we're hoping that this gathering will provide some solutions. And there's really one, so those are sort of the direct results on procurement itself. It's mostly donation programs, complemented by direct purchasing by national programs. But then part of some of the findings that we came across from this analysis was, so we'll be asking why do we only have this? You know, what are the other issues? So things that came up were like lack of visibility of NTDs and lack of prioritization. It's really not a priority. So when you're talking of procurement, if it's not a donation, then probably they don't procure it, or they only procure for test and treat in clinics, but it's really not like at programmatic level. But one thing that coming up was there is no funding. And I think the reason is because everyone tends to compare with what happens in HIV, what happens in TB, what happens in malaria, where you know where to go and get these products. You know there's funding associated with those systems. So the argument of lack of funding is mostly because it's comparing to what's happening in those diseases. And another thing that came up is that when we talk of NTDs, again, we're comparing with HIV, TB, and malaria, but if you look at the procurement systems for this, it's really vertical for each disease. NTDs, we're talking of 20 plus. So is it schisto? Is it mycetoma? Is it trachoma? Is it onco? There's a multiplicity of disease that actually makes it very difficult to pin, you know, procurement for what. And then look at the technologies, you know, it's 20 plus diseases, technologies, we're talking of diagnostics, we're talking of vaccines, we're talking of therapeutics. So it's very, very complicated for NTDs because of the multiplicity of disease. And another thing that came up again, because of this multiplicity of diseases, and then you add the other in HIV, TB, and malaria, there's really there's no coordination. You could go to country level. You have the national program procuring for a particular disease. You have implementing partners that could be procuring to support the national program or to support their own implementation plans. You know, some of these implementing partners are on the ground doing the work themselves. And there could be 3 streams of procurement for the same product in addition to the donation, and they are not talking to each other. So it's very difficult to see at this procurement, is it really for the needs on the ground in the country, or it's for the needs of each particular program? So that's one of the things that came out. But you can see a little bit more detail in the issue brief itself. So just to look more into the procurement systems, donation programs, let me just start by a disclosure here. So this issue brief is not anti-donation. It's really trying to look at what are the alternatives. Because if you look at you see that one of the challenges with the donation program, it's very clearly defined niche. It's for specific diseases, for specific technologies, for specific countries in some cases, for specific population groups, and for specific interventions. And it's almost always for a certain group of NTDs, probably 5 out of those, the 20 we talk about. And the question is for the other 15, for non-therapeutics, for vaccines, what are the options if donation is not an option? So that's really the purpose of this paper. It's not anti-donation. We know the value of the donation. So, and that's one of the strongest components of the donation programs. We're now at what, 49 countries that have eliminated at least one NTD, and it's mostly because of this donation program. So there is no doubt that they have played a role and they'll continue playing a role, but we have a long way to go with other diseases, and that's what we're looking for. So I have 5 minutes, I'm told, so I need to rush. So direct purchasing, I've already mentioned, it's really not easy to find out who's doing what, where, and procuring for what. So it is a challenge in estimating the gaps, the needs, the quality at a global level. Again, I have to rush through this, but you can find more details in the issue brief. And then lessons learned from other disease. I think one recurring lesson that kept coming up was the success of food procurement for these diseases. You talk of TB, everyone knows you go to Stop TB, GDF. You talk of HIV, there are even more options. You have PEPFAR, you have USAID doing their own thing, you have Global Fund doing another thing, you have the different implementing partners doing. So it's very clear. Same for malaria, UNICEF. So they're very clearly good examples of pool procurement for everything else except NTDs. And the only possible example for NTD procurement on a pool procurement level is the power example, where the power actually has a strategic fund that includes NTDs. So there is evidence that the pool procurement is used for NTDs. And there are the pros and cons of pool procurement. I will not go into the details, but one of them is that the pooling, I was moving faster than the slides. So one of the, I think one of the most important pros for pool procurement is really the aggregation of the needs and demand forecasting, which whoever is pooling that demand can then use to negotiate for price price reductions, then for good quality. So they're a bit more, it's easier to control the quality if you have this aggregation and you go to one manufacturer and you can sort of control the flow of the products to the implementing partners. So those are the pros. In terms of the cons, it needs a lot of coordination, especially it's across countries. Even at country level, there's need for coordination. If it's different countries, they have different policies. So it needs a lot of coordination. And it can be viewed as a challenge to national, independence, to their own procurement systems. So there is also need of political will and change of policies at some level. And it requires that enabling environment to make it work. So the discussion points that we're going to be focusing on, maybe through our panelists and maybe some contributions from the audience, is how can we use pool procurement mechanisms on a more global, more standardized, more, in a clear pathway for NTDs, for example, using the power example. If pool procurement mechanisms are the solution for which products, for which pool procurement mechanism? Are we talking of creating separate pool procurement mechanisms for NTDs, or we're talking of integrating into already existing ones? If we're going to integrate, what does it take? What are the resources needed to make this happen? And as we mentioned, that one of the things that came up is financing. So how can we, and Ngozi mentioned that talking this financing, there's really nothing innovative about the financing mechanisms themselves. The innovation is how we will apply them to NTDs. That's where we need to see what are the innovative options available and what other enabling factors are required to make this happen. So with this, I just wanted to acknowledge the consultants who carried out this work, Odon Molangu and Jamie Espan. It was not easy for them, I can assure you. It was a back and forth because the information was just not coming. And the expert reviewers, the key, the panelists to the first technical review we did. And I also like to acknowledge the panelists who will be helping us give their insights on how we can move forward, and the participants for being part of this discussion today. And hopefully we can come up with tangible solutions moving forward. Thank you. So maybe we have a few minutes for clarification questions. Any technical questions, maybe we can leave them towards the end once we've got some insights from our panelists. Do we have any clarification questions online? No. Ngozi, back to you.
Thank you, Isaac. That was really insightful, and I think it really sets the stage for the rest of our conversation and discussion today. Just to say, if you do have questions later for Isaac or any of the panelists, we will have about a 20-minute question and answer time. Let me just add a little bit more context to this conversation and remind ourselves what problem we're trying to solve. Isaac went into this a bit, but let me explain a bit more. Well, first, NTDs continue to pose a significant burden on the most vulnerable populations around the world. They impact 1 billion people, 1.7 billion people worldwide, and represent 20 diseases that are really just unified by the fact that they are diseases of poverty that affect the most marginalized in all of our societies. While progress has been made, we cannot overlook the existing gaps in affordable and effective technologies. Usually we're speaking about diagnostics and treatments. Isaac spoke about the current state of treatments to NTDs, and he really highlighted that the donations programs have been a major game changer toward control and elimination goals, but they do not cover all of the diseases. And due to several and populations that suffer from these diseases, and due to several limiting factors, including limited funding, fragmented demand, poor coordination, and ineffective procurement strategies, all which Isaac mentioned, it's very difficult to advance research and development of health technologies and products for neglected tropical diseases. Now, this has resulted in a shocking disparity in access to effective treatments, with only 10 new drugs being developed in the last decade to combat diseases for nearly 2 billion people. Another example of gaps is when we're speaking about diagnostics. The World Health Organization's World Roadmap for NTDs has emphasized the importance of diagnostics, listing them among the top 3 critical actions required to achieve the 2030 targets that they lay out. However, the reality is that only 2 NTDs currently have diagnostic technologies that can be considered robust. 6 NTDs lack commercially available point-of-care tests, and these are essential for rapid diagnostic outcomes in low-resource settings. And the remaining NTDs have point-of-care tests with limited fitness for purpose, such as low sensitivity or cross-reactivity with other diseases. The lack of sufficient incentives for innovators to invest in R&D of treatments and diagnostics and NTDs, as we're saying today, is a real challenge. So we have all of you here and the panelists and the online colleagues, because we believe that by exploring innovative finance mechanisms and creating supportive policies, we can overcome this challenge and drive innovation. Recognizing the critical need for improved diagnostics and treatments, we hope that existing pooled procurement mechanisms can play a pivotal role. And by utilizing these mechanisms, as Isaac, I don't know why I always switch Isaac and Simon, they don't even sound alike, but by utilizing these mechanisms, we can consolidate demand and ensure equitable access to affordable diagnostics and treatments. So with that, I would like to invite all the people in the room that are going to be on the panel, if you don't mind coming up and sitting down. I can name you. All right, so I'll just announce everyone on the panel, but then before every panelist speaks, I will give a short bio. So we have Christopher Lim, who is remote by Zoom. We have Dr. Beatrice Greco from Merck in the Praziquantal Consortium. Thank you, Beatrice. We have Dr. Paul Irasto from Tanzania, who is joining remotely. We have Dr. Brenda Waning from Stop TB Global Drug Facility. Please come up here. Oh, it's Brenda, okay. We have Mei Xie from DNDI. We have Dr. Michelle Teo from MedAccess. We have Sam Mayer with the End Fund, who is joining remotely as well. And then we have Dr. Dirk Ingels from Uniting to Combat NTDs. Fantastic. And Isaac, you're welcome to also come back up. Thank you. All right, wonderful. So to start, I'm going to introduce Mr. Christopher Lim. He's our first panelist. Just giving a nod to the IT folks. One moment. Okay, let me just give a quick introduction of Chris. So Christopher Lim is the Chief PAHO Strategic Fund Health Systems and Services. He's the chief at the PAHO Strategic Fund, which is the Pan American Health Organization. He's a national of Singapore, and he obtained his degree in computer science and information systems with a double major in economics and corporate finance. He's responsible for spearheading the development and execution of strategies to enhance equitable access to quality strategic public health supplies to the PAHO member states through programmatic initiatives to strengthen member states' priority public health program. Mr. Lim has more than 20 years of management consulting experience across various industries, including pharmaceutical, oil and gas, and advanced electronics manufacturing. So Christopher, could you please give us some insights from 20 years of working on post-procurement mechanisms for NTDs in Latin America? Over to you.
Sure. Just make sure that you guys can hear me. All right.
Yes, we can hear and
All
see
right.
you very well.
Okay. All right. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And thanks for having us to actually share our 20 years of experience in, I would say, generally in Latin American region, but which actually is very much cross-cutting from a therapeutic area standpoint, as you've heard, right? So we don't just cover communicable disease, but also non-communicable disease, and definitely like what we're talking about today, which is around NTDs, right? Neglected tropical disease. So I'll just start off with saying that the theme I want to go with today, right, is that while pooling of demand is great, it's a great start, but it has a lot of limitations, and I'll just go through that a little bit based on our 20 years of experience, right? And therefore saying that it is just going to act as a catalyst for us to do more technical cooperation work, market shaping strategies, which is extremely necessary. And I'll call it necessary as part of the symbiotic functions which pool procurement mechanisms needs to have. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So for those of you who are not familiar with Strategic Fund, we are essentially a technical cooperation mechanism for the region of the Americas, and we spearhead technical cooperation activities together with market shaping strategies that culminates with pool procurement. And that's to increase equitable access to essential medicines and health technologies for 35 of our member states within Latin America in itself. Now, technical cooperation has been the main driving force behind the fund's strategy, right? Based on our very strong collaboration with governments, with health authorities, clinical experts, and collectively we manage, just for example, right, we have managed to standardize the treatment protocols and guidelines for leishmaniasis and Chagas, which has largely been very tightly adhered to in the countries within Americas itself. And we have also deployed technological solutions like SysLish, which is a regional information system that is based on epidemiological and operational indicators to help capture the epidemiological situation of leishmaniasis within the region, so that we can properly analyze and monitor the situation within Americas itself. And right now we are also deploying and adapting, right, this quantification tool or forecast tool called QuantMet, which is essentially a morbidity-based forecasting tool, right, to help countries forecast and quantify medicines and health technologies that they need, right? And that is actually helpful for them to understand how much they need to be buying, when they need to be buying, and also at the same time, it helps countries do their national budgeting as well. So all these things comes together, right, from a technical standpoint, and also the financial standpoint. I must say that, okay, so all these activities, right, is necessary, right, to complement the pool procurement mechanism itself. So other than just leveraging on the economy of scale, there are also things that we need to do to incentivize manufacturers to invest. I think what we've heard as well, to invest in R&D and also the production of quality assured. So that's the other part, right? The supply landscape itself, right? So while we have actually done quite a fair bit over the last 20 years, but I must say that there is still a lot of challenges that we are facing right now, right? Especially around navigating the complex intellectual property and the patents related issues. Especially there were examples whereby we're faced with patents that was kind of like restrictive from indication standpoint. And then there's definitely a restricted number of generic manufacturers in the region or around the world that is WHO pre-qualified. There is also a lack of information systems to help track epidemiological situation of the different diseases that is important, right, from a forecasting of medicine standpoint. And the other part is also there's a need to help countries, right, update their national essential medicines list, the formularies, and also the country's benefit packages. So while I'll say all this is necessary, and our work is really far from being over, right? Despite our 20 years of experience in the Americas itself, we need to continuously listen to what our partners, our stakeholders, our member states need, what sort of challenges they are actually facing continuously, and definitely learn from, I think, all of us as partners here, right? And to hopefully continue this technical cooperation, this knowledge sharing, and innovative journey, right? To hopefully achieve our ultimate goal here of eliminating the burden of NTDs by 2030. So with that, I'll just pass the time back to you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Pahal really has been a leader in procurement and in, effectively delivering these sustainable delivery systems. So thank you for that. Next, we have Dr. Beatrice Greco. And let me just give a quick intro to Beatrice. Beatrice is the head of research and development and access global health for the Global Health Institute of Merck. Beatrice is responsible for R&D and access strategy of the Global Health Institute and for steering and advancing the pipeline. She drives dialogues from key stakeholders to define new mechanisms for equitable and sustainable access to innovations for NTDs. She also drives exchanges with experts in the field of infectious diseases, defining partnerships and collaborations. Beatrice has over 25 years of experience in academia and industrial industrial drug discovery and development with a strong background in neurological therapeutic areas. And so Beatrice, our question to you is why it matters. In a nutshell, how could PPMs impact sustainable delivery of PZQ, which is to eliminate schistosomiasis?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me first to attend this roundtable. So today I will be speaking more about the pediatric praziquantel rather than praziquantel at large. So just as a very quick recap, consortium of partners has developed over the last 10 years a pediatric formulation of praziquantel to treat children below 5 years old against schistosomiasis. We are now at a stage where we have submitted the dossier to the EMA under a procedure of EMA M4, and we're expecting hopefully a scientific and positive scientific opinion by the end of this year, with WHO PQ by 2024 and a listing into the essential medicines list by 2025. So this is a bit where we are standing. This product is essential for the tools that are needed to reach elimination as a public health challenge against schistosomiasis by 2030. Indeed, now all populations at risk of schisto need to be treated, including preschoolers, because now they have been recognized over the last years as being a reservoir of the disease, the earliest reservoir of the disease, contributing to transmission, but also accumulating the earlier signs of the morbidity of the disease. And today we are accounting for about between 50 to 55 million preschoolers at risk of schistosomiasis on the African continent. Those are WHO data. Today, the intent is to deliver this product not via donation, but as Isaac was mentioning, a not-for-profit procurement mechanism, leading to hopefully long-term sustainability. So this is innovation in the NTD space, not in other fields, but in this particular space. And while we are looking at the different elements and trying to build the different elements of this new access path, what has become obvious is that pool procurement is going to be a critical element for success. And this for a certain number of reasons. First of all, because this product is going to go through an initial path of implementation that is a mass drug administration path. And in particular, because we know via the WHO guidelines to countries that have been issued quite recently, that there is a recommendation to go for treating the 2 to 5 years old, essentially via a yearly mass drug administration to start with. And this mass drug administration, and we know that via the lessons learned of the donation programs, they do require a very large amount of tablets being available at country level on a given period of time to ensure that it gives the flexibility also to the countries to deploy their implementation plan according to their capacities. And having these large amounts does require to have a pooling of the information and a pooling of the ordering and the manufacturing. So already, just by the sheer fact of going through an implementation path that starts with an MDA, it does require a pooling approach. The second element is that we're talking about an innovation. We're talking about a new path to countries requiring procurement, and we've heard it. It's going to be very difficult, very challenging, because finance is going to be at the core of the topic. And therefore, ensuring that we have the most affordable and the lowest price possible to lower the barrier for countries to adopt this new approach is going to be very important and critical. And then the third element is that pool procurement, as it was mentioned just before, allows for forecasting, long-term forecasting, and incentivizing manufacturers to keep interest. Here today, we're in a situation where we have a new product, where we're going to be the first one with this product on this quote-unquote market. That means that we have a manufacturing path that is dependent on single source supplier for the active ingredient, but also the finished product. We need to keep the incentives for them to keep the production lines alive. And for that, we do need to have a forecast of large amounts in the near future to really keep their interest. Knowing that this product has a lead time of manufacturing of about 1 year and a shelf life of about 4 years, that allows and gives this possibility to have this pool procurement aspect and pool manufacturing in advance, and then to be able to deploy it into countries when actually countries do have their capacities to deploy. So I think with this, I'd like to stop. Just one last key word, and I think it was mentioned, it's the demand. How do we create, because the pooled procurement mechanism by itself is one thing, and we can learn a lot from the mass drug administration and the donation programs, and we can capitalize on what is already existing there. But when comes the pooling of the demand here not being public health needs, demands being a need associated with a financial backing for ordering and manufacturing. So this is one key critical element that is going to require massive capacity building. And with this, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Beatrice. We're going to now introduce Dr. Paul Erasto, who has been working with you on praziquantel. And Paul is joining us remotely. So Dr. Paul is a chief research scientist and director of research coordination and promotion at the National Institute for Medical Research in Tanzania. He holds a PhD from the University of Fort Hare in South Africa. Early in his career, he was also involved in research focusing on drug discovery, but it was with focus on TB and malaria. But for the past 7 years, Dr. Erasto has expanded his research interest by integrating NTDs and implementation research, specifically focusing on health system strengthening. Dr. Erasto, he has been serving, he's been coordinating projects on the quantification of medicines, strengthening institutional capacity to adopt and deploy pediatric praziquantel formulation when it will be available, and strengthening the capacity of the country to adopt and implement the new WHO roadmap. So Dr. Paul, could you please give us your perspectives and reactions on this partnership, and what are the interests that we should be aware of and the opportunities? Over to you.
Thank you, Ngozi, and thank you everyone and colleagues in the panel. Good morning. I don't know where to start, but we built interest on the NTD, and in particular the pediatric praziquantel formulation way back in 2015, when as a country we worked on setting the agenda for health system strengthening for malaria, CTB and NTD. Among the gaps which we found then was the lack of drugs for treatment of schistosomiasis in children under the age of 5, but also there was a gap on diagnosis. And then that's where everything started. From there, I and my colleagues started following up the works done by the Pediatric Brazil Consortium to see where they are heading and whether we are likely to have the drug for pediatric schistosomiasis. And then in 2017-2018, we wrote a grant for implementation research to start strengthening the health system, the Tanzanian health system, to be ready to introduce and deliver pediatric praziquantel. And this was backed by the information which we found from the website of the consortium that the new drug is going to be accessed through procurement. Remember from Isaac's paper, he said, almost all NTDs at the moment, we get the drugs, or the drugs are accessed through donation. So we thought it's very important to start very early to prepare the health system, also to let the bureaucrats know that the incoming drug, which is very important for the young ones, that will be accessed through procurement. So that's the work we've been doing, and work very closely with the NTD, with TDR at WHO under the Access and Delivery Partnership, which has been supporting these efforts all the way from 2014 to date. We also work very closely with the Pediatric Brazil Consortium in setting up the ground for pilot deployment of pediatric Brazil formulation. So what are the issues really? Number one, it's very, very important to keep the decision makers and policy makers informed about the pipeline products which are going to be available soon, and how these products are going to be accessed. And I'm looking at the drug itself, but also the diagnostics. As you know, for schisto, the gold standard for diagnosing schistosomiasis is microscope, the KKK, cathocards. But we have CCA, and now we have CEA. CCA and CA are expensive, so we need to prepare the system to be ready to budget. We also need to prepare the whole system to be ready to budget for the tablets. The fact is this: schistosomiasis there, and the children under the age of 5 are also exposed to the infection, just like these school-age children. In 2 or 3 studies we have conducted in Tanzania, and the first one was conducted by our very own institution in Mwanza in 2016. In one of the districts, the prevalence of schistosomiasis was found to be at 54% for preschool aged children. And in the study which I was actually leading, we found the highest was 54, but the lowest was around 12%. And this was not very different, not so far different between CCA and cathocards. And all these evidences were compelling us to work hard to make sure that we access this drug. So far, what we have done, we have been able to identify gaps and also address some of them, so that by the time the drug is ready, as a country, we should be ready to have it available for our people. Among the gaps my colleagues have touched on, one of them is when the drug will be available, how fast or how quick it will be included in the essential medicine list. That's one. Secondly, when the drug will be available, how fast it will be included in the STG, or standard treatment guideline. And when the drug will be available, how fast as a country we are going to be able to procure and have it supplied all over the country, or in the priority regions where the prevalence. So been working on this, and as for the inclusion of the pediatric praziquantel formulation in essential medicine list, that was sorted, because from the decision makers. They say the parent molecule praziquantel, the PZQ, is already in the nameplate. As for STG, this we have to develop, work on it, and soon be working on that. And as for procurement, we have started working on the procurement plan because already quantification of the amount of tablets which we need for the pilot phase and for the upscaling has already been conducted about a month ago. So what is remaining as the task now is to do the pilot deployment of pediatric praziquantel, and that's where now Beatrice Greco comes in the picture, as well as TDR and WHO and Access and Development Partnership. We have developed the protocol for pilot deployment, and we already we have concluded the strategy for delivering pediatric praziquantel in Tanzania. And in the strategy, we have outlined 3 delivery models which we think should be tested to determine which works. And if we are comfortable with 1 or 2 delivery models, that then we'll be able to work out retrospectively how much really tablets are needed, because we can't cover everyone. We have to set priorities, and it has to be also reflected in the model. So in a nutshell, this is what we've been doing in Tanzania. We have a strategy in place. We have the quantification for the 3 pilot sites. We also have the quantification of tablets for the 10 priority regions as per the program. We also did quantification, assuming that we are able to supply the tablets throughout the country. We have the number of tablets required per year.
Well, thank
2
you.
years and 3 years.
We're going to have to move to the next speaker, but we really appreciate the insights from Tanzania, and we're really looking forward to the pilot. And we'll have to do another roundtable when you all start the pilot. So I just want to move on to Dr. Brenda Waning. Excuse me. Brenda Waning is the chief of the Stop TB Global Drug Facility, the world's largest procurer of tuberculosis medicines and diagnostics for the public sector. She has been active in the field of access to medicines for over 25 years, focusing on the intersection of pharmaceutical policy, market shaping, and access to all types of essential medicines. Her prior experience transverses donor, academic, and implementer roles. And she's served as the coordinator of the market dynamic team at UnitAid, and served on the faculties of, I think she's currently serving on the faculties of both of Boston University Schools of Medicine and Public Health. So Dr. Brenda, we wanted to hear some lessons learned and some perspectives from the Global Drug Facility. And we're asking, what is the realistic opportunity for integration of NTDs into this existing platform? And what aspects, or platforms like GDF, and what aspects of GDF lend themselves to potentially being extended to include NTDs? Over to you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yep, good. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak here today. Yeah, I think that the lessons from TB and the Global Drug Facility are quite relevant for NTDs. Unlike malaria and HIV, TB is a ultra fragmented, very tiny market, challenging marketplace where long lead times for suppliers, they don't carry stock. And so it's what I would say about GDF is that I don't really consider it just a pool procurement mechanism. It's an enterprise that utilizes lots of different tools and services to address all of the different issues that you see along the entire product life cycle, from identifying what's missing, incentivizing development of those missing formulations, getting them through regulatory pathways, watching to make sure they don't get caught up somewhere. And then on the demand side, really figuring out, how to generate demand, how to do the quantification, the budgeting, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what I would say about our approach that I think is relevant here as well is that, and Beatrice mentioned it, you really need to work in partnership along the entire way. partnership with the suppliers. All the suppliers are different. They all need different incentives. They all work in different ways. They all have different modus operandum. So you have to be flexible. Same on the demand side. All the countries are different. Some countries might need to buy through a procurement mechanism. Some might want to buy directly, but could benefit from other support services. And then you need connection to the programmatic. So for us, the way we work is we really work through in collaboration with both WHO Global TB Program and major implementers like USAID is the biggest bilateral. And really what we do is we go together to the countries. So we have people in the countries and we focus really on the procurement and supply planning, but as part of a programmatic team where others do the work on the guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. And you really need that. Like you really need to have an end-to-end approach. And the procurement part is part of that. But really understanding what are the different activities and barriers from beginning until the end, and then adapting your system to address those barriers. Maybe a few examples of things that we've identified to be successful. Beatrice mentioned they need to be not for profit, but affordable, right? So how do you do that? If you want to, the suppliers need to cover their costs at least, but how do you make sure that their costs are most affordable? You need to figure out how to decrease their transaction costs. So for us, that means we have our own labeling in 4 languages, so they don't have to comply with labeling requirements across 100 countries. We help with registration, waivers of importation requirements if needed. We do have a stockpile, and Beatrice mentioned the need for a 1-year lead time. Well, that's kind of impossible if you don't have a stockpile, really. If you have a 1-year lead time on a product, you need to have inventory somewhere. And having a stockpile that allows you to deploy the medicines when each country needs it is really helpful. It also helps to decrease the erratic procurement that you will see with these products, because pooled procurement alone doesn't do that. Our stockpile does that because we're able to order monthly and have products shipped to our warehouse rather than the supplier having to ship 100 treatments to 100 countries. So I think really just to sum up to say that, yeah, pooled procurement is an important tool, but best utilized when it's part of an integrated end-to-end system, working in partnership with the suppliers, with the regulators, with the countries, to really identify and be flexible to meet their needs where they're at.
Thanks so much, Brenda. I think it's really important that you talked about the ecosystem, because we were really trying to demonstrate that with some of the with the panelists that are on. But if it's okay, May, we have actually a colleague named Dr. Brian Asari who was going to be doing the kind of initial reactions, but he has to go. So I was okay, I'll go to him really quickly. Thank you. So Dr. Brian Asari is the head of health technology assessments in Ghana and a senior technical officer at the pharmacy directorate of the Ghana Ministry of Health, and he's joining us remotely. He heads the National Drug Information Research and Monitoring and Evaluation Unit in the Ministry of Health under the pharmacy directorate. He has led and contributed to several technical initiatives, including the formulation and review of the National Medicines Policy, development and review of the Standard Treatment Guidelines and Essential Medicines List, including the COVID-19 treatment guidelines for Ghana, institutionalization of the health technology assessment and evidence-based medicine, as well as pricing systems, health system strengthening, antimicrobial resistance, and health information systems. So Dr. Brian, we're really pleased that you're joining us. Could you give us some of your reactions to the initial panelist presentations and the discussion so far? Over to you.
Thank you so much. I think that I'll be very concise and brief with what I have heard so far on the discussions. I agree largely to a lot of the things that have been said. I will just maybe add a little bit more to emphasize key aspects when it comes to NTDs and then pooling our procurement systems together. So I think I look at it from the broader health systems perspective, because if you look at it, we have called it neglected. And I think that it is time that we build systems around what we have termed neglected in a way that does not really make them neglected. It's time that we make a case for the systems to actually include or cover these areas as well. They may still bear the title, but then in terms of the operations and in terms of supply and in terms of procurement, it should not be a specified approach or a specific approach for a condition that we have called neglected. Whether you look at it in terms of incidence or prevalence, I think that we should have a systems approach to integration. And having said that, I want to start with the first comment on the way the financing of the procurements go when it comes to our neglected tropical diseases. And I think that is one area where we need to make a lot of inroads, make a lot of advocacy, so that when we have our financial plannings, we are able to incorporate budgets from neglected, where we are able to actually procure what is required to have that. I mean, if you don't have it embedded within the procurement planning and how we intend to finance, then that becomes a problem in itself right away, especially in lower middle income contexts. So that's the first maybe addition, having a health systems approach and addressing or integrating the financing of procurements within the entire system and have the system respond to it as part of routine work. And I believe that that is a sustainable solution when we look at it that way. The second area, which I would also emphasize, is how we do the quantification for neglected. I mean, some LMIC contexts actually struggle with data that would be used to do accurate quantification. And if we are also, again, using a systems approach, you would realize that some of the countries that are struggling with data to inform procurements for neglected do not struggle the same way for other conditions. So you realize that we have some systems, but we just have to extend that to cover neglected. And that would actually also help us. Poorly quantified can lead to waste and can lead to misapplication, or let's say misuse, or not putting resources to the best use when it comes to NTDs. And we really have to do this in terms of having quantifications that are accurate, and then from the system approach, also getting data from the system when it comes to it. I think if we look at that, and we will go to a step further to discuss how we'll pull quantities together and do pool procurement either at the country level or at the regional level or the sub-regional level, then we are making a case for efficient use of resources. We are making the case for efficient use of the allocations that we've had or we've made. So I think that the idea of pool procurement is a well embraced within the lower middle income context. And then we have to just address how we mobilize resources for financing, how we pull quantities together, and then how country capacity is also built to ensure that we have accurate numbers to inform our decisions when it comes to neglected tropical diseases. So I agree with the earlier presentations. Maybe these are the areas that I would like to highlight to add to the discussions. Over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you for bringing up very clearly the issue of data and the need for integration. I think we'll have a lot more conversation about that. So we appreciate your intervention. Thank you. So our next speaker is Mei Xie, who has been the head of business and development at DNDi since October 2018. She covers the partnership needs of NTD, of the NTD initiative, and manages the overall operations for DNDI, or BD operations, which business development operations, okay, for DNDI. May has over 20 years of industry experience in medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines product development, with a focus on partnerships and business development. Before DNDI, she was part of the senior management team for 2 of Novartis's research and development institutions. And so, I just wanted to, I was thinking about DNDI in this recent report that was released on procurement, and it reminded me of what Mr. Itani said earlier about the Nagasaki statement. And there's just this convergence of opportunity. And so we really would like to hear more about, the work that DNDI has done on this report. And I know this report specifically highlights GDF, and Brenda went right before Brian. So we'd like to hear more about your insights to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers for convening this very important event. It is indeed opportune, and the timing is quite perfect. And we speak to many prospective manufacturers for DNDI products, and very common question is, is there a global fund for NTDs? And so, really, this is not, as you said, new, and everyone is really looking forward to concrete steps forward. So thank you for that. And for those of you who are not familiar with DNDI, we're a virtual R&D organization developing new medicines and also new regimens with existing medicines, specifically tailored to the needs of neglected populations, which, as you see, have many gaps. We do work predominantly in, let's say, what is classified as NTDs, but also outside, including populations that are neglected in hepatitis C, pediatric HIV, et cetera. And so maybe that fits into, I think, some of the working definitions, also GHIT. So we appreciate that. So in any case, we also fully agree that R&D efforts will not have impact if there are still gaps in the access ecosystem. And so this is really the topic, I guess, of all of us here today, is really to get our heads around this very complex access ecosystem. So last year, when DNDI decided to conduct it's a very modest, exploratory analysis, we chose to focus, because otherwise we kind of risk it getting a bit lost, or there's a tendency to spin our wheels a bit. So we thought, let's try to crystallize a few concrete steps that could be feasibly moved forward to move towards what, like I said, focusing on an improved procurement mechanism. So I think all the previous speakers have really started to build the picture very clearly. That is, it's more than just pooled procurement. And actually, when we spoke to Brenda, it was like the light bulb went on, and we said, my goodness, really the piece that could make sense to really articulate clear and put it out there for further utility is this strategic rotating stockpile, and understand better what are the requirements, a bit of like, what products lend itself best to a low risk rotating stockpile, because in the end, there needs to be a guarantor of sorts. And if it's not run very efficiently, you get big wastages and costs. So a well-run stockpile, in theory, could be revolving, and these funds are just used to guarantee, in sense, that the stockpile is utilized, and it becomes a very nice proposition. So as a tool, so I think the other concept of building a concrete toolbox, toolbox that can be utilized by countries as per their needs to ensure sustainability. And I think, Brian, thank you also for preceding what I wanted to say is, so really there are two concrete actions that were articulated in this report, which, one is to dig deeper, learn from GDF and others who may have utilized also very similar concepts to, in a way that it's like an instruction manual for those who want to use it, either build to tack on such a stockpile in existing procurement systems, or whatever new systems are coming into play as we speak. Because of course, within Africa, there are probably many interested organizations that could also benefit, but not universally. So I think that's the other message. It's not one size fits all. So perhaps the toolkit is something that has to be tractable for the users. And in the end, the second concrete solution, so it's not a solution, but a step forward, I think, as everyone said, is to convene involving countries and to understand what has worked for them. And I think this is also clear. It's very different and not one size fits all. So I think to end is to say that really the meeting with a focus to move forward with concrete steps is consistent with what we've also tried to articulate in this exploratory report. And DNDi as a gap filler for R&D, you can extend that principle to access. And we're very much looking forward to coordinating with like-minded organizations and see where in fact DNDi could fit into the picture. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, May. I think a lot of what you were just talking about really sets up our next speaker, because, you know, who's going to guarantee, who's going to provide the funding. Dr. Michelle Teo is with MedAccess. She is the Chief Investment Officer. And MedAccess is a social enterprise that has improved access to medical innovations for more than 375 million people. In her role, Michelle has overall responsibility of MedAccess's guarantee portfolio. It comprises of volume and procurement guarantees, as well as the capital investments. Michelle's experience spans from finance and healthcare. And before joining MedAccess, Michelle was a managing director at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and vice president at AIG Financial Products. So Michelle, Dr. Michelle, sorry. So 3HP market, which is the treatment for latent tuberculosis. Could you tell us about, you know, MedAccess's involvement and bringing all these different tools together, including pooled procurement, and how can that case study potentially give us some lessons learned for the neglected tropical disease space?
Thanks for having me here today, and thank you everyone for convening. I think first off, MedAccess has just played a very small role in the 3HP market. I think going back to what the speaker said before, it's a coalition of everyone coming together with a shared vision to want to change this market. So I took this as a case study because it's quite interesting, because latent TB impacts 1.7 billion people around the world, and it's eminently treatable. And we rewind back 5 to 6 years ago, you go on this treatment course that lasts between 6 to 36 months. Clearly, patient adherence isn't very high, but then it was this movement towards this new regime called 3HP, which is a combination of 2 antibiotics that you take 1 pill once a week for 3 months. So patient adherence is higher, patient efficacy in terms of treatment is higher. So there's clearly in-country demand, but how do you translate in-country demand to actually patients being treated? And that was difficult. At a point in time, there was only one supplier of rifampicin, which is the second antibiotic that is key to making this a short course treatment, but they were selling it. They had low, I would say, capacity to produce, but also selling it at a pretty high price. And what it required was actually at this point in time, a lot of effort from the Stop TB, from Unitate through Impact for TB and for Global Fund. So I think what was really important first was rifampicin was put on GDF's catalog, which allowed countries to be able to purchase this drug. And then not only just thinking about, okay, there's this pool procurement mechanism in place, there were then very active and extensive discussions, led by Unitate and GDF and Global Fund with Sanofi, to then reduce the price from $45 to $15 for a patient course. That's a 70% reduction, and that is huge in terms of the ability for countries, and patients to be able to access this. And then Unitate didn't stop there. Right. And neither did a lot of the partners. They thought, well, what else can be done? Because the biggest thing now, you just have one manufacturer in the market. So you do want some sort of supply security. And there was another manufacturer, and there were 2 generics coming on board, but will take time. And how do you encourage them? Going back to what you say, what do manufacturers want? And it wasn't just one thing that helped McLeod, which was the Nix generics, which was the first generic supplier to come on board. It was a bundle of initiatives. ranging from, child support and commercialization. So, negotiating through regulations and registrations, impact for TB, helping to work on demand and generating the implementation in country. And so it was all that came together. But also what the supplier also needed was a multi-year visibility into what procurement could be. And that's where MedAccess came in. Like I said, we were actually, to be honest, a small part in the overall, scheme of things. But, one that helped to break a chicken and egg situation where, you had procurers that weren't willing to perhaps start buying a product because they didn't know what the supply would be going forward. So you don't want to start countries on something that isn't going to be available or would have limited supply later on. But you also then had a supplier who said that we're not going to scale up capacity till we know that it's coming in. So you're kind of working through that. So I'm not going to say that, so you'll see that, different, I would say different instruments and different tactics we use from different parts and trying to solve different things. I think when I look back, and even I look now, we're still learning about how best to create effective and implementable, market shaping partnerships, right? In the TB landscape, Barbara talked about this, Brenda talked about this a bit. It is difficult. There is a lot of times limited, financing and drug regimes and new products come aboard, which makes supplies or rather demand forecasting quite difficult. And having that is challenging, but required for suppliers to come aboard. But I think the biggest thing that we kind of think about is the only way we can kind of work towards this is actually working in conjunction with, GDF, with UNITAID, Global Fund, NGOs, countries, suppliers, civil society to work together to try to adapt, various instruments we have and move forward for that to try to cater a solution that works for a situation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. I think that perspective from MedAccess is really important. And like you said, you are reiterating many of the panelists' points that this is a complex partnership that can be done. For another perspective, we would like to introduce Sam Mayer with the End Fund. Sam is the Vice President for Public Affairs at the End Fund. He is responsible for the organization's global external engagement, including advocacy and communications that advance neglected tropical diseases, their platform, and attract additional resources and attention to the NTD sector. Sam leads the End Fund's efforts to mobilize a growing ecosystem of NTD champions across governments, the pharmaceutical sector, and a coalition of other cultural, private sector, and community-based organizations. Before Sam was at the End Fund, he was the executive director for international programs at the MAC AIDS Fund, where he oversaw a grant portfolio that supported 130 HIV/AIDS service organizations across 50 organizations. So Sam, could you tell us, from your perspective, how pooled procurement mechanisms what we need in place specifically when it comes to pooled funds, and could those be a jumpstart for neglected tropical disease PPMs? Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and it was very nice to be with you and many of you in person over the last couple of days. Sorry I couldn't remain there in Geneva for today. But I think we've heard, in answer to your question, Ngozi, we've heard a lot of perspectives on that. And I thought from the End Fund's relatively sort of unique vantage point in the sector in terms of our work with philanthropists, I thought it would be useful to just offer some reflections on our experience working with philanthropists and pharma in conjunction, in coordination and partnership over the years, as we as a community look towards new solutions and sort of complementary solutions to the donation program. Isaac, I thought you put it very well at the beginning in terms of looking for these complementary solutions to the existing donations. So, I mean, the first point I would make is it's been said and it bears repeating that the existing pharma donations really have helped create this best buy in public health narrative, which we cannot underestimate how incentivizing that has been to philanthropists. And philanthropy plays a disproportionately large role in funding delivery in our space, and that has been built off of the back of the donation program. And so that's definitely worth repeating. But I think something that is perhaps less obvious to many in the sector is that, yes, that Best Buy narrative will bring in philanthropists. It's an easy on-ramp, if you like, for philanthropists in this space. But many of those philanthropists who have stayed in this space and gotten to know the space and gotten to understand the nature of programs, how they evolve, and the fact that last mile activities, for example, that we heard a lot about the last couple of days, require different interventions, different types of coordination, and are inherently more expensive. Many of those philanthropists who came for the cost effectiveness of delivering donated medicines have stayed for the more expensive last mile treatments. And that's an interesting evolution in the partnership. And it's something that's really, really important as we think about new mechanisms and how to attract funding. We need to think not just about how to get funding today, but how to keep the interest of those funding sources, those funders over the longer term as we support country leadership towards elimination. And the second, sort of the flip side of that coin, if you like, the second point I would make is that, you know, the motivations of many of the philanthropists we work with really vary quite a lot. And whilst many are motivated by the cost effectiveness narrative, many are motivated by supporting a country's leadership towards the elimination of a disease. Many others are in fact motivated by funding where no one else will fund. And so the concept of leaving no one behind and simply providing, I say simply, it's not that simple, but providing annual deworming treatment in a context or a country where there is little to no other funding to do that, that is also a huge incentive for many of the philanthropists that we work with. And so as we look again to new mechanisms, making sure that those mechanisms can function for country programs that are at different stages of their journeys in terms of dealing with control and elimination of NTDs, and that are appealing to potential contributors to these mechanisms who have different motivations and who may want to contribute at different sort of stages of that life cycle. And the third point I would make is that I think it's helpful to maybe reflect on a few specific examples of how we have worked with our philanthropic partners and some of our pharma partners, just to try and tease out some lessons learned and some key points as we look to new pool procurement mechanism ideas. So in 2019, we were able to bring what was a relatively unusually large amount of private philanthropy into the deworming space specifically through the TED Audacious project. And this really was to support the really quite progressive policies of Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe for their deworming programs, helping them accelerate progress towards the elimination and in some cases even work towards interruption of transmission for intestinal worms and schistosomiasis. And, you know, combined with the progressive policy environments that we saw in those countries, the N Fund and our partners have a long-standing and very trusted relationships with the ministries of health and the NTD program managers in those countries. And, you know, I think by bringing in this guaranteed funding for a 6-year period and putting together a plan that was in support of the governments, it altogether created conditions that elevated the amount of stability and sort of trust and opportunity in the deworming space. And that allowed our partners, specifically at Johnson & Johnson and Merck, and Beatrice, we've heard from one angle from Merck's work today, from the pediatric formulation and that thinking, but in terms of general access to praziquantel, Merck has been extremely innovative in how they think about how to optimize their existing donation. And so in the case of J&J, you know, we recognize that every company is making their donation allocation decisions in different ways, and we respect and try to work with each of them in that regard. So with J&J making decisions on an annual basis, there are some years, some instances whereby we get to the end of the year and the allocation for that year has actually not been optimized. It's not been met. That supply has not been met. And you know,
Sam, do you want to just summarize, because we'll have to move on really quickly. Apologies.
Certainly happy to. So essentially, I'll skip ahead to say that the conditions that helped both J&J and Merck think differently about the existing donation programs, expand those donations to reach other at-risk populations in service of progressive government policies. These conditions, you know, have helped these companies think differently and act differently to optimize donations. And I think, you know, the key words I would pull out of that process are trust, flexibility, the nimbleness, and supporting country leadership. And I think if these terms, these concepts can be at the heart of how we look towards new pool procurement mechanisms, it will serve us well as a community.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you for kind of sharing those final words to help guide this conversation, I think, as we think of practical ways forward. So our final panelist today is Dr. Dirk Ingels. You know, we've heard a lot of perspectives, but we really haven't heard the patient perspective. And so Dr. Ingels, he will bring that to us. He's a global health consultant and senior advisor to the Uniting to Combat NTDs organization. And he's also a retired director of the Department of Control of NTDs at WHO. Dr. Ingels worked at WHO for 20 years, and he ended his tenure there in 2017. And during his work, during his time at WHO, he worked on infectious and tropical diseases and had been instrumental to developing norms and standards for the large-scale implementation of NTD interventions, especially towards the development of the first NTD roadmap with a focus on elimination, and in steering the global expansion of interventions for the control and elimination of tropical diseases. So a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom on this panel, and it's great to end with you, Dr. Ingels. So like I said, you'll be providing the patient's perspective, and we also would love to hear more about the reflections on the Kigali moment that UTC really put together and was very successful in launching in Rwanda last year. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on the opportunity to integrate NTDs into existing PPMs.
Thank you. It's always good to have the last word, of course. And about the patient perspective, I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to say the whole idea of working to get neglected tropical diseases out of neglect was about providing essential medicines for NTDs to the people in need. That was the bottom line. Now, Isaac made me laugh saying this is not against drug donations. How can you be against drug donations? The first roadmap and the London Declaration was built around drug donations. Access to essential existing NTD medicines for the huge number of people that needed it. So, nobody will deny the success of the first roadmap and London Declaration. So I think in a similar way, access to novel health technologies has to be the core business of the implementation of the second roadmap. And the rest can be built around that. I say need for novel health technologies because most of the products that we will need will be novel health technologies for the 10 additional diseases in the roadmap, but also for the elimination endgame and the surveillance thereafter of the 10 London Declaration diseases. Let's not forget that. The second difference with the first roadmap is that the donation era is slowly but surely coming to an end. And that makes sense. I mean, we need to put our minds on working out mechanisms that can ensure sustainability in the long term, and that can systems of which health services, health systems can refer to when the time comes for countries to do it on their own. The donations will continue. That has been a clear pledge that was made by the private sector last year during the Kigali summit. Donations will continue until endpoints are reached. The second good news about the Kigali Declaration was that there were unprecedented pledges for innovation, for research and development, that obviously need also access plans. I mean, innovation without access, forget it. It doesn't make sense. Now, does direct procurement work? I can tell you no, with a blunt no even. We've tried it for existing NTD medicines like non-donated Leishmania medicines, and it just doesn't work. I mean, there are just a few producers, countries can't have access to it, and WHO was actually forced to put up a mini PPM for that, which has been an improvement, but it has its challenges. And if you ask me, the main challenge is it's not large enough in scope. It doesn't have the leveraging power with producers to keep the production of those products on. They would rather stop and shift to other more profitable products, of course. So I wanted to go a bit further into detail why I think that a global effort for pooled procurement is required, but I'm not going to do that because I think Brenda did it more eloquently than I could have done it. In fact, you could all your elements you could transpose to NTDs, I believe, with the major difference being that we're talking about 20 diseases instead of one. And that makes it even so much more complex. Now, the question of a specific mechanism for NTDs or not. Uniting to Combat NTDs did a donor survey about that. And the outcome was clearly that there is no appetite to set up a new specific mechanism for NTD. The consensus was to add NTDs to existing systems, which would be obviously the most cost-effective way. Which systems? That was not clearly defined. One system or several systems, that is what we need to further discuss today. And then my last point is about what products to prioritize. Of course, if we want to implement successfully the new roadmap, we're going to have to need many products, from medicines to diagnostics, to vector control tools, to veterinary public health tools. But if we could focus already on medicines and diagnostics, that would really be a fantastic way forward, because the other tools will need different supply mechanisms, I think. Now, do we have to prioritize within medicines and diagnostics? I don't think that makes much sense or is not a big issue, because even if there is an increase in R&D, these products are going to come one by one, and we won't be flooded by new products. The only thing we need to do is be ready when they come out of the pipeline, and there are a few that are ready to come out of the pipeline. So it is actually rather urgent to get something decided. 2030 is 7.5 years away. That's tomorrow morning. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dirk. That's a great push to end the panel on, because this is urgent, and that's why we're together today. I do want to we're going to go into question and answers, but I want to thank the panelists. And just to say, Christopher Lim joined the call at 2:30 a.m. his time. So just thank you for everyone for your efforts and for your great insights. We give a round of applause. Thank you so much. So I want to go into Q&As immediately. I'm going to add an extra 5 minutes as we're running a little over time, which gives us a little bit less time for the break, but I think we should be okay since we've been going in and out of coffee. I've gotten I've gotten a few questions from online, and I'm happy to take one question here and then go back to the panel and then, go around like that. Okay. So Toko, maybe you can go first with your question and then I'll read the other questions out and then we'll go to the panelists. Please go ahead. Sorry, one.
Isaac, maybe. And then maybe you guys can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for very interesting presentations. Mine is just a clarifying question from Paul. He mentioned that there were 3 delivery models to be tested. I was just curious what they were. That was just a clarifying question, but otherwise really enjoyed the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Sit with that question. I'm going to read 2 other questions and then we'll go to the panelists. So from Fabienne Jopertonnet, is a question for Beatrice. They ask, isn't UNICEF the organization that could help for the pooling and supply of praziquantel tablet, which does not solve the financing aspect barrier? And also, does a co-financing subsidized price for launching the product, could that be an option as opposed to donation? And then Bethan Hughes asks, given what we have heard from Beatrice and Paul, is it the case that PPMs would be easier to introduce for MDA programs rather than test and treat, thinking about the need for demand predictability? Actually, I'll just add one more question as well. They're all for Beatrice at this moment, but I'm sure there'll be more. The last question is from Daniela Fusca. How are you planning to put together countries in need in order to foster this pooled purchase? Is there already a plan? It would be beneficial to anticipate the access to the drugs even before they go to the market. So let's start with Paul and then we'll go over to Beatrice. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, thank you. The 3 delivery models as follows. One is integrating delivery of pediatric praziquantel with the vitamin A supplementation program in the country. You know the vitamin A campaigns. And the second one is integrating delivery of pediatric praziquantel with community mass drug administration for schistosomiasis. This is not very popular because we haven't had this before. We just piloted this in 2 times in Tanzania. So we want to go with it again, test if it works. And the third one is the test and treat. And in our case, we want to integrate this through the RCH clinics. We know with the RCH clinics, we have access to balances and other amenities which support the provision of services to children under the age of 5. So those are the 3 delivery models we are going to be testing for about 18 to 24 months. Thank you.
So I think the first question was about UNICEF, right?
Yeah.
I think indeed within the consortium, we are considering different UN-based type of approach, and UNICEF being a very obvious one. Why? Because actually we're considering the pediatric praziquantel in the context of schisto elimination, but first and foremost, schisto in children is a child health development challenge. So it fits perfectly within the strategy of UNICEF, and we are looking into ways also of in the implementation path that we're testing with a couple of partners. We're looking at ways also to integrate that within child health days, which are also mainly driven via UNICEF programs. So there's a dialogues that are being opened, of course. There was an element about co-financing.
Yes. Does a co-financing subsidized price for launching the product, is that an option basically?
So I'm not sure if I understand totally the question here, but I would say that today, when we are considering the price of the tablet, right, we are looking at it, making it at a not-for-profit approach. And from a financing perspective, I think it will require to have at the start donors that are going to be supporting countries in their procurement path. And that is going to be a way of subsidizing, of course, on behalf of countries. But this, and I think we need to be creative here of thinking about how we can also incentivize countries to participate with this famous, as mentioned, co-financing, even as a subscription, of an anticipating procurement, even as a very modic kind of amount, because at the end, we are talking about initially about 26 million kids in this 2 to 5 years old range. It's a large amount of kids, but at the same time, it's not a tremendous amount. And from a price tag perspective, it might be that actually from country to country, the price tag is going to be fairly limited. So co-financing, sort of a subscription for advance payments, etc. There's different ways that we can be thinking about it, together with, of course, donors that are going to be supporting us at the beginning. I think from a UNICEF perspective, Dirk wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, about UNICEF, I don't know if people know, but UNICEF has been an important partner for procurement of deworming drugs in preschool children, because deworming drugs weren't donated for preschool children. So it's UNICEF who took care of the procurement. That was basically for large-scale programs, deworming programs, either the World Food Program, for instance, who systematically dewormed their children. Their slogan was "Feed the children, not the worms," which makes sense. But then also other deworming together with vaccination, and UNICEF has been doing that procurement.
Thank you for that insight. Dirk, did anyone else want to answer any of those questions, or I can move on to the next one? Please go ahead.
So I think, I mean, what we've seen really as a way to incentivize national financing is really the need for 1 to 2 years of grants for countries to introduce or adopt a new product. So if you really want to make a sustainable program, then you pay the suppliers as normal, but then some other donor provides money for grants for the procurer to give to the countries, along with the technical assistance on the programmatic and the procurement side to make it happen, with the condition that, okay, we'll give you these grants for 1 or 2, 3 years, however long you need, with the agreement that you'll work this into your domestic financing. And we used this, we had Japan funding for pediatric DRTB medicine. So we're talking about 500 to 1,000 kids per year is the market. And we were able to get these into about 60 countries within a year, because we worked with the suppliers from the beginning. We were ready, as you said, when they launched, we were ready. And then we were ready with the demand side, with the money from Japan and the infrastructure that USAID funds us for our services. Yeah.
Thanks, Brenda. I'm going to move on to the next round of questions because I have quite a few. Before I go to online, anyone in the room want to ask any questions to the panelists? Yes, please, Isaac. Putting Isaac to work. Thanks.
Hi, Joan Herbert from Medicines for Malaria Venture. I have a question for Brenda. Hi. Just around the stockpiling, how does that lead to challenges with expiry and wastage, and how do you address that? Is it just something you have to factor into the cost of the facility, and how do you control the excess?
So Brenda, can you hold that question? Okay, great. All right, so from online, so this question is to you, Isaac. Did you get information about the companies that produce diagnostics, and are there local pharmaceutical companies producing diagnostics, and how can local manufacturers drive the innovation in NTD diagnostics? The next question, I think it's for May, but I think others can answer as well. But we had a lot of interest about diagnostics, which is great because we have a roundtable on diagnostics. But procurement of diagnostics is essential for strong health systems and effective use of medicines. What insights are there on the procurement and access of diagnostics, especially in light of the recent WHA resolution on diagnostic capacity? Is pool procurement an option for new diagnostics coming through the pipeline? It's very similar to the first question, but then there's a question for Paul on data from Cynthia Fonta. I think the lack of data on incidence and prevalence of NTDs within poor communities and LMICs limits attention towards funding and procurement. And so there must be a well-functioning nationally coordinated center in alliance with countries' ministries of health that keeps up on the epidemiological situation of each disease. So how can adequate data keeping on the case of diagnostics be improved to and be made available to policymakers to enhance political will so that countries can improve and, as far as their country ownership and have less reliance on donor support. So Cynthia, you asked a lot of questions, but I want to ask all of them because it might be hard to go back, but I guess the other questions are kind of theoretical. It's like, where do people go to get these medicines? Not theoretical, but large. And then then she talks a bit about poorly equipped primary health centers. So let's start with Paul, and then we'll come back to the panel. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Ngozi. I hope I got the question correctly. Well, generally there is a challenge of data on incidences and the prevalence of most of the NTDs. So what we normally do, we rely on the programmatic data. It is fortunate in our case that NIMRI has been doing a lot of work on schistosomiasis, and in particular, prevalence of pediatric schistosomiasis. And this has helped us to generate assumptions, which has helped to do the quantification. About improving data access, well, the program has been working very hard to ensure that NTD data are included in the DHIS2, and we are still working on this. Of each and every entity information is included in the DHIS2. And this will be perfected when the service delivery part includes NTD. As Asari said, most of the NTDs are not in the routine clinics. So if they are included, that will really enhance the integrity of data. Otherwise, for now, when you are doing these, the quantification or any sort of calculations to inform procurement planning, some very important assumptions must be made. And this is what we have done in our part. Thanks.
Thank you. So when we started, initially, we wanted to look at all the NTD technologies, diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics. But at some point, we had to give up because when it came to diagnostics, besides the few diagnostics that go through the WHO donation program, all the other diagnostics that are available are procured at country level. But the thing that came out was that there are no diagnostic tools to ask about procurement. If you look at Schisto, it's a microscope, and it's used in a health center for many other things. So yes, they have a microscope, but can you link that to NTDs? It's very difficult. So the diagnostic assays are actually, they don't exist. And you gave a summary of what's available. Everything else, it's an R&D issue. So we actually have to start making the diagnostics available as the first step to access. And then we have to say, once we stimulate the R&D, how are they going to get to the people? So that's the issue for diagnostics is actually much, much more upstream than access. Thank you.
So the question on the stockpile, we have practically zero waste in our stockpile. It took us a while to get to that model. There was sort of phase one, phase two. Phase one, we had a lot of loss. Phase two, we kind of tore everything apart, built it again from scratch. And now over the past 7 years, if I don't know exactly, but probably less than $100,000 in waste for a $30 million stockpile. And that's because we call it a strategic rotating stockpile. So it doesn't just sit there so that when you have an emergency, you open it up and you send meds, but you actually use it to deploy medicines for the orders that you're getting so that you're rotating it. We aim to rotate the stock 3 times a year. Now we're at about 5. And so what that requires is production planning with the suppliers up front so that it's in the stockpile when you need it. And then triangulation with information from the countries. So for the countries ordering, we know how much stock they have on hand, what their enrollment plans are, how long it takes to get through their customs process, et cetera. So we know, do we need to deploy some or all of it from the stockpile, or do we send the order directly to the supplier? And the only products that we have wastage, and we haven't had them yet, but we will, are those pediatric DRTB medicines, where you have 5 medicines that you need for one treatment, all different batch sizes, but they all need to be available at the same time. And only 500 kids a year using them. So we basically say, we'll take the hit. We have a specific risk fund, but again, it's small. Even for that, it's small money, small volumes, but that's the only product where we anticipate having any loss. And I think it was so successful that J&J actually gave us their medicine on consignment. And that's provided a new model. They'd rather send it to us. We hold the inventory. We don't send them 120 orders. We send them 12 a year, 1 a month. And it serves as a model. We're now talking to other suppliers about consignment models.
May please go ahead, but then Christopher, we see that your hand's up, so we can come to you as well, but please go ahead.
Yeah, this is why we're very keen to talk further and try to really collate all of these learnings. But I think the question was more about diagnostics, which probably eventually we need to bring our experts in diagnostics, Find, who's also here in the room. But I will say one thing, because with treatments, we need diagnostics. This is a partnership that is indispensable. So when we had a discussion with a particular diagnostics company doing point of care PCR, and I know Find has done a whole study, so this may just be one example where they told us volume and scale. There are economies of scale, but for the technology, so they can deploy different diagnostics for different diseases using the same technology, and scale counts. So I'm just thinking through pooling does make sense as well for certain technologies planned in advance. So, and again, it maybe requires selecting the right technology that suits the most diseases that you can group together for scale. And it doesn't necessarily mean just NTDs, it can be grouped with other diseases. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think there is an opportunity.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Let me just add to that. And I think this is actually part of the broader NTD discussion about how, integration. Because now, I don't remember who said about the neglected diseases are not considered when everything else is being discussed. So as you're saying, maybe they're thinking about HIV, TB, malaria, but the same technology could be used for NTDs, and that could actually increase the volume, and then that could make a difference.
Yeah, and I think as your report was product agnostic, that's why we gave you the question. But you're right, we will go deeper in our roundtable. So the last question, and thank you everyone for staying on longer online, we appreciate it, and in the room, is for Christopher Lim. And it's actually quite torturous for me to have him go last because he's been on for so long. But Christopher, in case countries are ready and willing to be part of the pooled procurement mechanism and they have the funds for their needs, is there a mechanism of how the funds will be handled? So like which agency will pull the resources and do the procurement? Over to you, Christopher.
Sure, thanks. Now, because right now I'm actually on the way to the airport, so I'm not going to turn on the video and all. But nonetheless, yeah, just let me address the last question first, but I've also got a couple of comments on a couple of earlier points, right? So just very quickly, from PAHO Strategic Fund's perspective, from a funding standpoint, we would definitely think that the best way to actually channel that is to the countries of concern, right? And we can definitely help with identifying which country would have the biggest need from an epidemiological burden standpoint or disease burden of disease standpoint. Because from our perspective, we definitely want the ownership to be taken by the countries themselves. Because I think it's been mentioned several times that I think donation can just do so much, and it's not going to be sustainable. So I think from a accountability, responsibility standpoint, we always want to work with countries and member states to pass that on from a sustainability standpoint. So I hope that answered that question. I wanted to also quickly come back to the question around stockpile. Also just mention that from the strategic fund perspective, we do have a regional stockpile as well, but it's really more from a donation and I would say emergency use standpoint, right, where there's extreme outbreak of specific disease, or there is a sudden disruption, major disruption from a supply chain standpoint. But I'm really quite interested, I think, with the model that I think Brenda has mentioned around the collaboration with suppliers, and definitely I think we should talk offline a little bit, and wanted to see how we could actually do that or extend that actually beyond communicable disease, but more into the NTDs itself, non-communicable disease. So that's one thing. One other last point before I drop off, right, is with regards, I think one of the panelists mentioned about, the whole thing about neglected tropical disease is the inequitable access to medicines and technologies, especially the innovative ones. I think, and so far, I think we have been talking a lot about the transactional piece, but we may not have really addressed the elephant in the room, right, which is intellectual property. I think there is definitely, from a food procurement standpoint, I think from a solidarity standpoint, I think there is really a lot of opportunities for us to collectively talk to innovators in terms of the usage of voluntary licensing, food licensing standpoint, and so on and so forth. I think that's definitely, I think, an area of focus that we should all be looking at as well, especially for the innovative or the new medicines and technologies that's to come. And also just to say that from a food procurement mechanism standpoint, there's definitely a lot of economy of scales to reduce the transactional costs, especially in terms of things like, product registration. I think there was a question on that as well. Rather than having every country or the suppliers, the manufacturers actually do registration in the various countries one at a time, if a collective food registration can be done, which is what we have been doing in the strategic fund itself, I think that really rapidly increase the lead time, or rather reduce the lead time that's necessary for introduction of new medicines and technologies into countries where it's badly needed. So that's one thing, right? So things like this, the collective way of doing it through food registration, and of course, validation and qualification of new suppliers, that sort of thing. So all this can be done at a one-stop shop that benefits a list of countries. So I'll just stop there, and thanks, and nice having all of you. And I need to drop off. So
thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, safe travels. Have a good flight. I wanted to end, but I'm being pressured to do one more question, so I'll do that. But I think it's great that we have so much interest. I hear there's a lot of questions online. We will have a meeting report. We'll capture those questions. If the panelists have time and interest, hopefully you guys can answer some of the questions that are not answered now. And just the last question is really for Sam. Establishing a pool procurement mechanism for non-donated medicines and diagnostics is critical and essential. However, the most important question for me is the funding mechanism, hosting agency for the procurement, and getting the required donors. Okay. Any plan or idea on these issues? And that's from Daniel. Sam, I'm so sorry to rush you, but can you make it a 2-minute response? Thanks.
Certainly, I'll try and make it faster. And I think actually the prior comments spoke to this as well. So there's no need to repeat that. I think what I would do is just come back to the key points and some of the lessons that we've learned through, again, not working specifically with PPMs, but some of the key concepts that I think are really important as we look to what the right PPM is, and therefore what the right kind of agency is to fulfill that function. And that is, the trust, the flexibility, the ability, the nimbleness, and the willingness to work with a really wide variety of different countries that are at different stages in their programs, and have different policy environments as well. And finding the agency, finding the mechanism that can be as complementary to the country context as possible. That's the only other thing I would add.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. I just want to end by saying, I'm excited for the next part of, well, this first part was excellent. Thank you again to the panelists and to the audience members and to everyone online who have been quite engaged in this conversation. But I'm excited also about the second part because, sitting here and hearing real case studies and real examples of how this has worked or the different components and the complex partnerships that are involved makes me think that we can come away with something today, hopefully. We're not going to solve all the problems in the world, but we can have a good start because we have real experts with real experience. So please join me in saying thank you. Oh, sorry, Isaac, would you like to say something? Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, initially we had plugged in Dr. Sose to address the people who are in the room. So I think it's a good opportunity while we're still online for him to say something and then we can close.
Yes,
yeah.
You really came in here quietly. I did not see you. Please come up, Dr. Sose, or would you like to go back there? They can't see him if he doesn't know.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry for coming late. I was in another meeting on the supply chain forum. But everything is interconnected. You need to make sure that you have a clear system end to end. Otherwise, everything will still be very piecemeal and you will never reach the sustainability, Emily. If you don't think system, end-to-end process. And for me, it's a real opportunity also to learn because there are areas that need specific expertise and you cannot be expert in everything. You cannot guide people on where you want to be, but need to listen to them and work together to find solutions. So it was good that over the last 2 days, we have been busy talking about solutions and actions. And I'm happy that you are taking this important pillar on supply and procurement. And as you rightly said, this is not only specific to NTDs. You have so many other programs face the same issues that manage to find solution, but we need to also learn from them, from their success, but not only from their success, but also from their failure. And when we started the pandemic response, one of the biggest challenges for us was everything on procurement and supply for new disease, new tools to be able to deliver them to almost all the countries in the world. We were lucky because in our transformation of the emergency program, we had set up a new department called Strategic Health Operation, where everything on supply and logistic procurement was really, really strong. But we had even to build it further by doing rapid review of the first initial months of the response to the pandemic to be able to adjust. We couldn't do it alone, of course. We had to use with so many partners. We started with the joint platform with UN and other organizations called the COVID-19 supply chain system to start, working, learning, and being flexible to find solutions. I think we have a great opportunity today with so committed partners, and thank you, Glad, for organizing this event. I'm sure with a very solution-oriented and action-oriented, approach, we can find solution. You cannot, I always tell my team, don't say it's not possible. Let's try everything to make it possible. Otherwise, you will never make any move in this space because you will always find some kind of admin or legal issue and you will stop. We need to find solution with those people who set up the rules because they're not coming from the sky. It's people who decided that it should be like this. So how can we work together to find solution? And let's also, as we always say, make sure that everything we do is really aligned with the need at country level so we can sustain the effort. I'll be brief. Thank you so much. I'm happy to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sose. That was, great remarks to end on from the WHO NTD director. So thank you again on behalf of GLIDE and Uniting Efforts. And we'll end this part of the event. We'll have our break and then we'll start the roundtable. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.